We'll be talking about, connections with other nations and what Kenya is doing to ensure that the economic situation improves, gets better, is on top of all of that. And in order to have that conversation today, we are joined by, or rather, the Principal Secretary in the Department of Trade in the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment. Alfred Ombudo. Ombudo is here with us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning. And how are you today?
Very well, thank you.
Yes, it's a pleasure being back here. Yes. I think I was here about a year ago.
Yes, you were.
Yes.
And things have happened since then. And some of those things we'll be discussing today.
Yes.
But it's good to have you here all the same.
Thank you.
Big ticket department that you're in, and stuff that is necessary for Kenya to be able to get it up a rung or two. So those are some of the conversations that we'll be having.
Yeah.
But CT wants to welcome you with today's proverb.
Yes.
And so we're going to get you to work as though you don't already have enough. And you can tell us what that proverb means to you and how you would interpret it. Fair enough?
I'll try my best.
That's all we can ask.
Yeah.
Okay.
Our proverbs for the whole of this week come from the United Republic of Tanzania. A fruit tree that grows in a dung heap will certainly blossom.
A fruit tree that grows in a dung heap will certainly blossom. Well, my interpretation of that is that from not so glorious or from difficult circumstances, that is what creates the conditions for things to grow and become better. And from the most unlikely of things, excellence, beauty, and nourishment does arise. So we should always have an open mind and always do the hard work and the inglorious part of work that brings glory to the end.
Now we are going to actually ask you to be a consultant when it comes to interpreting proverbs.
Maybe that's a retirement plan.
So, you don't have to think about what you do later. It's already sorted.
But I need to get my first contract from him.
You need to
as a proof of concept.
Right.
Are you alluding to a certain list that was unleashed by the Public Service Commission?
No, I'm not alluding.
By any chance?
Well, something needs to be signed.
Yes.
But stuff has already been signed, from what we understand. And we're looking at a strategic agreement that has been made between Kenya and the United Arab Emirates. And what then that portends for the country. We know, just taking off the conversation that we had with you a year ago, is that there were certain plans that were already in place and that there were, the wheels had started turning in terms of what could be done to ensure that Kenya and its trade partners around the world take things a notch higher, whereby you're able to ensure that there's a free flow of, number one, information, communication, and then also this trade that we're talking about. Yes. But here we are then with the UAE Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. Can we start really from the beginning and say, very simply, what is that?
Thanks for that. The Kenya-United Arab Emirates Economic Partnership Agreement is a comprehensive agreement between the two countries that is expected to increase trade, make it easier for us to trade goods, increase the level of trade in services as well between the two countries, enhance our ability to cooperate on various economic sectors. But most importantly, it is a signal to the world that these are two countries that have come of age and that are both the gateway into their respective continents, and that we see lots of opportunities for that agreement to bring more trade, more investment. At the core of it is that we now have a common understanding on trade procedures, on how to trade livestock, animals, plants, vegetables. We have a common understanding on issues that are extremely important for investment, such as intellectual property and all of those other areas. So that is what the agreement is all about. We are going to take it to Parliament for ratification, just like they will. And then we do hope that trade will increase.
Okay. There's a phrase that you've used here, it says common understanding. So essentially, so Kenya understands that this can happen. The UAE understands that this can happen. And that is, so everybody knows that, okay, we can actually do this. There can be free flow of information and communication. You can actually improve and increase trade. You know, we see Kenya and the UAE see each other, essentially. But what is the trigger? What turns the key that these things actually happen? We can have a common understanding, but it just sits there as an understanding.
Exactly. So, I maybe let me start off from here. The UAE is Kenya's sixth largest export destination. We send a lot of our tea there. We send a lot of fruits, vegetables, and flowers there. And it's one of the largest sources of our meat exports. Actually, if I just zero in on that, we're exporting about $74 million worth of meat there. And this has increased tenfold over the last 10 years. We are exporting flowers there, about $30 million worth of flowers, about $10 million worth of vegetables, and so on and so forth. The UAE is also a big source of our imports. We are basically getting close to about $2 billion worth of oil products and a lot of hydrocarbon derivatives from that. And of course, a few manufactured goods and so on and so forth. So it is an extremely important player for our export performance. And therefore, why do we need an agreement if then the figures are already showing that it's an important country already? We want to triple our meat exports into the UAE. We want to triple our horticulture exports. We want to have more of our professionals get work opportunities and get subcontracting opportunities in the Middle East, which is a very strong area that's growing in certain sectors such as artificial intelligence, ICT, building and construction, and several professional services. This agreement lays down a framework that creates access to Kenyan professionals in agreed areas into those sectors so that then they'll be able to have so-called national treatment and ease of entry when it comes to exercising opportunities in that market. When it comes to things like the meat sector, we have now agreed that what are the rules in as far as animal health is concerned? How do we deal with issues whereby disease outbreaks occur, where previously you could have a total ban on exports to certain countries? And we have agreed on how other goods and commodities will be treated when it comes to customs, when it comes to trade measures, and so on and so forth. So this agreement creates predictability, but it also creates a dispute resolution system, which allows Kenya and the UAE to identify problems when they arise in as far as exporting all of these issues are concerned, and then gives us a basis to solve them quickly. Another thing that's extremely important about an agreement like this is that it signals to investors that Kenya is the gateway to Africa and that Kenya is ready to receive sovereign funds to invest in this country, also from the Middle East, and also what I would call near sovereign funds. So the investment community in the Middle East gets indications as to where the investments will be safe, where intellectual property will be respected, where an investment mechanism has been agreed upon, how digital trade rules and data protection and all of those things will be done. So it basically sends a very comforting signal to investors to come in and invest as well. And that's why the agreement is important, because then it basically creates a transparent environment whereby we stimulate trade and investment.
First to state my history, what he's saying is true. And I can tell you it's true because I worked for a long time for the Kenya Export Promotion and Branding Agency. And we had many discussions with the UAE, and that's exactly what they were asking for in terms of an agreement. I know they have a big desire for especially goat meat from Kenya. It's quite a big demand. Now, my question then arises, what institutions are being created beneath the actual agreement. And I'm basing this, for example, off of the American agreement, AGOA, which literally is running out this year. No, it is actually about to be
September.
over. In September we'll not have AGOA. But one of the things that kept bugging me is we had a brilliant agreement with the United States, but many of our business people were not interested or capable of delivering to the United States. So the critical question for me has always been that we make very good agreements, but then what are the structures that will bring, that Maasai herder with 200 goats in the middle of Oloitoktok to have the awareness and be able to be taken through a process where they meet the phytosanitary requirements, they meet the export quality requirements, and they're able actually to track these things. And I remember, just to give people an example, South Korea once, while I was still in office, asked for bananas from Kisii. And we couldn't supply because every farmer had a different way of growing his banana, so we couldn't standardize. So my question is, agreement is good. I've gone through it. I think I don't even want to poke holes in it. My question is, what are we doing for the common Mwananchi to be able to chip in? Because there's a kid somewhere who's just left school. He's looking at his 5 goats and he's thinking, is this my ticket out of poverty?
Very, very important question. I mean, trade agreements are designed so that they can be utilized. And if they're not utilized, then it's not worth the effort. One of the key things, just starting off with the United States, is that we are now exporting about $500 million into the United States. And if you look at the data, coming up with market access through AGOA really helped create this. We didn't have much of an exporting textile and garment sector before AGOA. We weren't exporting much of cashews and macadamia before AGOA, and leather and so forth. And even now, we have very strong opportunities around our tea sector. We take it that people take their tea warm and with milk, but the Americans take it cold and with the fruit flavors as a sports drink drunk by young people. So trade agreements open new markets and it creates new opportunities for new sectors to arise. Now, into the UAE. You've asked a very fundamental question. I like the fact that you say, how does this change the life of a herder that has 5 goats?
Yes.
It's probably very difficult for somebody like that to directly engage in the export market. But what we are doing is that because we have now created demand for our meat products, particularly for the small animals, we are working on improving aggregation. We are building county aggregation and investment parks, which basically will allow that small herder with 5 goats to basically take their goats for proper slaughtering, for proper flaying of the hide, and for aggregation and cold storage facilities to be done. So some of the counties are looking at the livestock sector as what they will do for the county aggregation parks. Now, once we are able to do better aggregation through that and other initiatives that we are doing, then you have small players being able to participate in the export sector, even if they are not directly engaged in that. So that is an example of some of the activities that we are doing to promote this, the county aggregation and industrial parks. We are also doing a lot of business development for mid-sized exporters that want to understand what are the export procedures, how do you sign a contract internationally, how do you deal with currency fluctuations, and so on and so forth. So that is also a second thing that we've done. One third thing is this: before we get into signing a trade agreement and getting into the negotiations, we thoroughly study that market. We thoroughly study the opportunities that are there, and then we develop tools to enable us to work with exporters. Let me share some very specific examples in the context of the UAE. We looked at the meat sector there. We realized that the UAE is importing about $2.5 billion worth of meat annually. We realized that about $1 billion of this is coming from Brazil, mostly cows. And we also realized that India, Pakistan, and New Zealand are also supplying a lot of this. Kenya is one of the larger suppliers there, maybe at about $80 million. We also then studied the retail sector and how this is actually distributed in that country. And so we learned a few things. We learned, but even before I get into the retail sector, we learned that the port of Jebel Ali in the UAE, and if we go outside the UAE to Jeddah, are mostly the two main ports whereby at least $120 million worth of our meat is getting into through those ports, whether it's through live animals or meat products. Now, we then understood who are the players, who are the importers, what are the terms, what are the issues that our importers are facing. We, for example, were not able to maintain successive orders once they were there. Then we went on to understand how is the retail sector working. We realized that in the UAE, Spinneys supermarket is serving a certain clientele, mostly the expatriates. We have Union Corp that basically is providing subsidized shopping services for Emiratis, Lulu's, Carrefour, and all these others. And we spoke to the procurement managers in all of these retail sectors. We even sent out a team that visited over 500 outlets. So we understand right down to that display section that displays meat, whereby we could see Pakistani meat and its price, Kenyan meat and its price. We understood the volumes and we understood how this is all sold. We then even went into the what you call the hotels and restaurants and cafes chain, and understood the preferences that market has for those products. How much fat do they need? What is the age of the animals that they need? We keep on exporting animals that are older than they need, and so on and so forth. So without getting too much into a rabbit hole, we have now understood this market to that level of detail that then enables us to work with our exporters to supply, for the contracts to be done properly, for us not to supply overage animals, for us to do the right cuts, for us to focus on the right animals, which is mostly sheep and goats. We have realized, for example, that there isn't too much opportunities around the exporting of chicken, for example, because about half of all the chicken they consume today are produced locally, and so on and so forth. So we are actually having a lot of work that goes before we sign a trade agreement in order for the export volumes to arise.
Okay.
Just one quick question. Sorry, this is, I'm very keen on this because I was actually involved in Expo 2020 and we had long conversations, and I must congratulate you because in my checklist in my head, you've hit almost 90% of them. Now, the 10% is that for a while, they were dubious businesses that had actually, not on the Kenyan side, by the way, for once, Kenyans were innocent, but on the Dubai side, where Kenyans would supply, and then the guys in Dubai will be like, what are you on about? We never saw this particular agreement. So is there protections, and I know this is not necessarily in the trade agreement, but are there protections, or rather a list of approved people that Kenyan businesses can supply to with the confidence that once it arrives, they are able to be paid? Because that was one of the biggest hindrances to that. Now, on the flip side, and this is just a slightly off topic, there was a big question about what are the routes that Kenyans can use when they're repatriating their money to invest correctly in Kenya. How are their monies being protected? Many of them have sent money to their wives, their kindred, and found out ilikulwa. Yeah, so those are just my two questions.
Okay, I think very important questions. And this goes into the core of many of the problems that sometimes our exporters have faced exporting out there. And not just in one economy, but, we have, for example, had issues with payments whenever we have taken our tea to certain markets. And these problems arise out of mostly two things. The first thing is that sometimes when you are taking products like tea, to countries that have currency conversion issues, then the availability of dollars becomes quite limited, and therefore payments are either delayed or sometimes not done. Secondly, is that unscrupulous buyers exist, and that is what you've alluded to. And how do you defend yourself from an unscrupulous buyer? One is that through a trade agreement, we have immediate and guaranteed access for dispute resolution. And that basically allows us to identify and solve problems faster than countries that may not have this kind of relationship. Two is that we are on the back of this agreement and on the back of the research that we have done, going to do a lot of training to exporters. Actually, with the State Department for Livestock Development, we are in the final stages of putting together a livestock development program. We will look at things like, how do you do a contract internationally? What are the ways in which you should ensure and guarantee? Who are some of the trusted buyers that basically we've been able to see? We would not vet a buyer because a buyer and a seller is a private relationship, but we could have information based on prior record on who some of the trusted buyers are. The other thing then that we also need to do is to improve on our volumes and how we organize our exports in such a way that then we are going to connect to more serious buyers who want higher volumes and higher qualities and have a better reputation.
And consistency.
And these are the kind of things that arise when you have an agreement like the SEPA. The third thing that arises that also helps with our export performance is investment. Trade is about investment. Most traders start off by trading, and as you get to know your customers, you get to know your buyers, you end up investing. So we believe that Kenya is now in a position to attract investment into ranching, into large-scale land ranching, and also to partner with players that have experience in this. That's why Brazil is exporting $1.1 billion worth of beef into the UAE alone. That's why countries like Uruguay are doing that. And I think it's time then that as we support the pastoralist sort of smallholder export market, that remains extremely important because of livelihoods. But then we should also build volumes and bulk by getting into the ranch business.
Indeed. When we have these agreements on an international, you have the bilateral agreements on an international level, then there's a lot of work to be done at home. And that's what gets you, a leg up with the work that you do at home, because you can have the agreement, but you don't activate it here. Then I guess the next part of that is to find out, so what are the activations that are happening here to ensure that, number one, you deliver, and then number two, that Kenya continues to present itself as a country that's open for business. The Principal Secretary Trade, Alfred Ombudo, is our guest this hour, and we're looking at the Kenya UAE Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement this morning. So these bilaterals, in some cases multilaterals, but for the purposes of this, it's Kenya and the UAE. And there's been an agreement to say that, okay, let's do this. Let's enhance our trade. Let's open it up a little bit. And then, like you say, well, not a little bit, because you want to triple. If you're doing $74 million of meat and $30 million of horticulture and $10 million of vegetables, you want to triple that in the next, however long. Then there requires to be, on this side in Kenya, the adequate infrastructure, communication, resources put behind, because it's not going to miraculously happen. You can't just wish it into existence. So one would then say, at the time when these agreements are being made, is there then also enhancement at home to ensure that you can actually have these numbers to fit with the agreement?
Extremely important. One of the things that needs to be done anytime that you've opened market access to new markets for new products is that people need to know. Over the last 1 month, for example, we have been to Kisumu, Eldoret, Machakos, Isiolo, Mombasa, Kajiado, and several other places to, for example, speak about the opportunities created by another agreement called the EU Economic Partnership Agreement, which we had occasion to speak about last year. And essentially what we were doing was sharing information, working with the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, with the Avocado Society, with the Kenya Flower Council, and with all those private sector players, to reach out to their members and to talk to them about what are the opportunities we are seeing, what are the products that they are able to export based on our strengths as a country, what are the export requirements that they need to be able to adhere to, what are some of the trade financing measures that currently exist, and basically also to have them think differently about the fact that participating in exports is not such as difficult an issue as sometimes it may seem. So lots of outreach has happened, and in this kind of case, we shall also be doing lots of outreach for this particular agreement. We will reach out to those in the livestock community. We will reach out to them so that then they'll be able to aggregate, make sure that the animals are vaccinated, make sure that the animals can be aggregated, make sure that we talk about the importance of doing very sanitary and clean flaying of animals, and that basically improves their prices and so on and so forth. In the agriculture sector or the non-meat sector, which is the fruits and veggies and flowers, we'll also get into that. But there are lots of other activities that the State Department of Trade is already doing to show up our export performance. And I'll share some examples. Together with State Department of Industry and Investment, we are finalizing the first stages of the county aggregation and investment parks, which will provide lots of space and lots of aggregation for various commodities. And we are working quite closely with the Council of Governors that they shall be able to have these up and running. Secondly, is that we realize that we need a multi-commodity exchange in this country. A few of the crops that we have already have established methods of getting to market. For example, tea and coffee and so forth. But for a vast majority, we don't. So over the last year, we have actually worked with over 15 banks, Family Bank, ABSA, KCB, Equity, some of the government financing institutions as well, to agree on what it will take for them to actually improve lending to the agricultural sector through the commodities exchange. And we worked on this with the World Bank Group and the International Finance Corporation. We have also worked to also ensure that our warehousing in this country can be of a standard whereby the commodities, particularly food commodities, are not getting spoiled. Don't forget that we're losing close to 40% of everything that we harvest. We want to bring this down maybe to less than 10%. So the warehousing receipt system is also agreed to between us and about 15 banking institutions, warehouse operators and so forth, so that we now have a common understanding what is the design of a warehouse that can be used for agricultural commodities. What should a warehouse operator be having an ability to do? And how do we connect that to the commodity exchange so that banks are now able to provide financial services when I take my 5, 10, 15 bags to a cooperative society, maybe in soy constituency, like there's one called Mateng, which is there. And once then you're able to have your goods there, banks can now also provide some financial services for you to take kids to school and for you to get the next inputs that you need for plowing and that kind of stuff. Now, a country's ability to aggregate at that scale is extremely important for export performance. Because if we're going to, for example, take pulses to India, whereby we get lots of orders from, if we are going to be able to aggregate tea and other products in a way that sort of gives speciality to it, then aggregation is extremely important. And that is something that we have done with the warehouse receipt system and the commodity exchange. We should be launching them in just a few months from now.
That is actually excellent news, because the warehouse receipting system is one of the things that was the biggest hindrance. Not only in terms of exports, because you need to export in quantities that are frequent and the quality is the same, and then the farmers need to get a good price, and that also gets rid of middlemen. I'm so happy. So you've answered two of my questions with that answer. So So far, you're doing very well.
Thank
now,
you.
The other question is, one of the biggest exports to the UAE from Kenyans is in terms of the service industry.
Yes.
Right. I think Kenya, in service industry, we are actually in a surplus.
Yes.
That we actually export more services than we import services. So, Heko Kenya. Now, my question is, there is... of course, there's been talk about getting jobs in the UAE and things like that. But as you talk to young people, the biggest challenge actually is that they want to access remote work. So they're not necessarily looking for a passport to go to the UAE or America, or wherever it is. But the problem is that we don't have agreements, perhaps with the countries in terms of where they can source the work from, agreements in terms of how these young people can get the actual jobs, because sometimes the jobs are geo-locked and they need to use VPNs and things like that. There is billions of dollars literally that young people are crying for without necessarily exiting our country. How is the ministry or your State Department dealing with the difficulties in receiving money, registering, and be considered as valid online service providers for this country? And you can look at countries like India, and I forget which other Asian country, which basically makes about $6 billion a year on just allowing its citizens to work remotely for American, British, and UAE companies.
Actually, what you raise is extremely important. The services sector is a huge driver of both our domestic economy and also our export economy.
Yes.
Sometimes we just can't see it because you can see goods being exported. Whenever you see pictures or infographics of trade, you see containers and trucks and cranes and laboratories and that kind of stuff. You basically see the part of our export sector that is the goods side. What you do not see and is hidden is our services sector.
It's big.
But look at the data. We are exporting just about $7.2 billion worth of goods. But we're exporting $5.5 billion worth of services.
Yes.
And even in 2002, we exported about $6.9 billion. What is that telling us? It's telling us that the services sector is an extremely important part of our overall export performance. In fact, as you correctly say, we are exporting more services than we are importing services. So we're exporting 5.5 billion, we're importing 5 billion. So we are a surplus country when it comes to services. On the goods side, we have a deficit because we are exporting $7.2 billion worth of goods and importing about $18 billion.
Okay.
So we have a deficit there of about 11 billion. Now, what then are we doing to ensure that we grow the services sector? The Ministry of ICT, ourselves and other players, we all have something to do, our TVETs, our education services, and so forth. You have often seen His Excellency the President make references to a young man, I believe called Brian, who is able to get into the gig economy, use his phone, and make money using this. What have we done to ensure that we have several brands in this country? The Department of ICT is basically doing Jitume laboratories and several other capacity enhancements so that internet and those kind of services are available to people outside Nairobi and all over the country. Our TVET and our Ministry of Education is placing lots of emphasis on education on ICT as a subject that basically needs to be done. But at the Ministry of Trade, we have also analyzed what other countries have done in order to grow both their services sector and also their digitally delivered services sector. And when we look at the world today, we see certain strong markets, and I'll share some specific examples. If you look at the EU is a 13 trillion euro market economy with 27 countries. If you look at the demographic profile of the EU now, it's a society that's having a lot more older people now. Businesses are increasingly starved of young people that are able to work across the economy. And that creates a very unique opportunity for countries like Kenya. We are able to digitally deliver services, be it in the accounting side, on the legal side, on the ICT side, and so on and so forth. And this then has become a key area that we are pursuing with the Economic Partnership Agreement with the EU. We are currently undertaking an analysis in partnership with the World Bank Group and the Ministry of ICT to understand where the task orders are coming from, to understand what sort of services are needed in this area, and then work backwards with our private sector to deliver this. We also licensed Kenya's first special economic zone that is focused on services. And this also represents our vision that the services sector is providing lots of opportunities for our export performance. Thirdly, is that when you look at our quality of our data and ICT sector in terms of things that big companies care about, such as data adequacy, laws, whether, for example, data protection rights are being done properly, and so on and so forth, you will see that, for example, we have negotiated and secured common data adequacy rights with the EU, which basically means that data stored here and data processed here is assumed to have the same legal quality and protections as those in the European Union, which is a $13 trillion economy.
Right.
And so on and so forth. But if I may basically just touch on one other thing in the services sector, we realize that there are certain subsectors within services that are driving our export performance.
All right.
This is transport and freight services. This is travel, which includes business travel and tourism. But a key one is financial services, insurance, and all those areas to do with that sector. So when you see the likes of Equity Bank and KCB Bank going out into the region and basically offering services in places like the DRC, this represents a very strong part of where we expect our services export growth to come from, and we shall be working quite closely with those sectors to ensure that they're able to grow.
Okay.
In fact, my thinking is that in less than another 5, 6, 7 years, we may actually be exporting more services than we're exporting goods.
So then, when you look at that, because I think it's possible to have a marriage of the two. If we look at the countries on the planet, on the globe today, who have reached some level of economic independence, we see that actually none of them have gone this way without enhancing their manufacturing sector and their investment and trade. That they've become mechanized, that they have become automatic in nature with what they do and how they produce. And so we've seen this on a global scale. That's just how they sell, that's how they trade. And in order for us to do business with them optimally, then we also have to be kind of on the same page. That mechanization has to take, center stage, that manufacturing has to be top notch. It's difficult to compete with somebody who has trained and achieved that status if you're just still in the baby pool, essentially. So then the question is, what are the plans for that? But as you say this, there are some countries who may be mechanized but do not export on that global scale. I'll take Hungary, for example. Hungary exports more than anything else. It's education. It's education and it's science, it's technology, and it's putting that out on a global scale. So the agreement for them is to realize, well, this is one thing that we do and that we do well and that the world needs. It's not a secret that Kenya, with its services, because speaking of, able the command of the language, number one, number two, how it's been able to work in different markets. If we look at the Gulf, if we look at certain countries in Europe, is it maybe a way to make a shift and say this should be something that we could focus on instead of trying to compete on the mechanization scale where we're clearly behind?
Well, very interesting insights from you, and thanks for that. Look, I think I agree with you on one side is that we have to do more than one thing at the same time. We have to keep on manufacturing and exporting based on our core strengths. A lot of this is still at the commodities level. We export a lot of raw commodities, but manufacturing has also been taking root. If you look at our export performance within the EAC and COMESA, we are taking sweets to Malawi. We are taking school socks to DRC. We are taking cement to South Sudan. So we are actually manufacturing. One of the key concerns that has been affecting manufacturing is the cost of electricity. And that has modified our value proposition vis-a-vis a few of our neighbors, for example. And let's not forget, over time, people learn how to make things. So the things that Kenya, for example, was undisputedly manufacturing in the 70s and 80s and 90s, over time you can expect that our neighbors should gain ability to produce some of these things. The quality of machines that are able to do manufacturing, you press one button here, pour a bucket full of something on this side, and something else comes out on the other side. So what that means for us is this. Kenya needs to increasingly make things that are difficult to make.
Absolutely. Or that only they can make.
And only they can make, or very few people can make. And what does this mean? It basically means that we need to get more into automotive manufacturing, or make parts thereof that can get into global supply chains. It means that we should substitute the more than $500 million and $60 million worth of pharmaceuticals that we are importing from India and Switzerland, respectively. It means that we should basically get into the ICT sector in a large way for us to be able to host data centers that are basically mining information, whether it's for crypto or whether it is for other uses. We need to get into those sectors because we have educated people. We have a good environment to attract professionals, and we basically have what it takes to enter into these supply relationships. And this is where the trade agreements come in.
I need to ask this.
Sure, go ahead.
Does the department that you belong to
yes
also focuses on trade in country?
Yes, we do.
Because everything we're saying here makes perfect sense, but every year we have an increasing number of Kenyans who actually can't afford to eat.
Well, food inflation has gone down significantly over the last 2 years. We have done a very major fertilizer program that has brought the cost of food down.
Yes.
And the CPI on food is down.
Yes. This actually isn't your department. Yes, everything you've said is yes. But what I said was there are people who cannot afford. Not that the price of food has gone down. No. There are people who face starvation.
Yes.
And the number increases. My reference here is trade.
Yes.
And the capacity of the country and the counties to trade with each other.
Yes.
So that before we have these high-flung ideas of what we want to do with technology, we actually feed ourselves first. If we know the strength that each county has,
yes,
and we perhaps give a little more attention to the trade, inter-county trade, so that Nyandara, instead of pouring its milk when there's an overflow of it, know directly where this thing can go. One, we take care of our people. But in the process, we also pilot as to how these newfangled ideas about technology and what have you, we get to do them in a space where we have benefited from them. So when we take them out, it becomes that much easier. I have a problem with focusing primarily. Again, this is not a problem that is directed at your ministry. This is a policy that we have with regards to how we manage our people. When we focus on doing things which bring us money and the fundamentals of simply looking after the basic livelihoods of our people, and this is where department comes in. Your department can help in ensuring that this actually works, so that all these things that our people do and produce can actually help other parts of the country where such things are not produced, and so the trade is actually enhanced.
You know, CT, as you talk about Kenya, there is the Africa Free Trade Agreement. which was supposed to actually answer the question CT is asking, where trading between Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Ghana, whatever, was supposed to be easier. Where are we on that? And because time is also going, AGOA is about to end, which I know a lot of the textiles and whatever, which hire Kenyans, tailors and things like that in our special economic zones. What is going to happen with that?
Okay, thank you so much. Let me start off with what CT basically talked about. External trade gets a lot of attention granted because it involves our relationships with other countries. We talk about foreign exchange and so on and so forth. But you're right. The basis for that is to ensure that our domestic trade is also working properly and that we need to solve the problems that are confronting that sector. In 2012, we devolved trade as a function to the counties, and therefore we now have 47 partners that we are working with to ensure that trade works well at the domestic level. So issues like licensing, issues like markets development and so forth is a devolved function which the counties are responsible for, but which we work closely with them to ensure that it still happens. What are some of the things that we are doing in the domestic space? In the domestic space, we are working with the Council of Governors and the counties and a number of players to ensure that we remove or we regulate cess between products that are moving from county to county. We've made some progress in terms of trying to agree on formulas around how those charges could be done. We are working, like I previously said, to ensure that aggregation can be done. And this is not just for exports, because if we are able to aggregate potatoes better in Nyandarua in a way whereby they have access to cold storage, someone in Kisumu or in Moyale then has better access to that and they can be consumed better. If in West Pokot, which is a big area for potatoes as well, they are able to have good county aggregation parks for that, then it means that companies like Tropical Heat and others that basically make potato crisps are going to be able to have a more predictable source of raw material.
Right.
And so we've done about 11 or I think 18 county aggregation parks in association with the county governors. And this is to support local trade as well.
I'm sorry, Piers, but the thing is, we need you to come back because an hour is just not enough to get on. And as we start to have these conversations, realize that even at the local level, there's so much that needs to be done.
Yes.
And we need to see what government, is doing. And that conversation needs to happen with Kenyans as well. So this is an open invitation to come back and let's open this up a little bit more.
Yes.
And I'm assuming that your answer is yes. So we're going to go with that.
Yes, we'll go with that.
Yes.
FCTA is an area whereby we're very keen to continue doing a lot of exporting. We're exporting about $3 billion there. And maybe that's where we could start off next time.
All right.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.